Pompeo graduated first in his class at the West Point. The second best American military college in this country. He was a cavalry officer in West Berlin. He's a successful businessman who was elected to Congress 4 times before he becoming the director of the CIA. And he's not done yet. So please join me in welcoming America's 70th Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Well, it's great to be here in the Bay Area. It's great to be back in California. I grew up in Santa Ana, California. So Miles, I got my first speeding ticket in California too. I also got my second, my third, fourth. Elmer, I cannot thank you enough for the blessing you have bestowed on me by allowing me to be here today. What's so special about that is that couldn't happen in China. You know, I grew up here under Governor Ronald Reagan. He was then my commander-in-chief when I was a young soldier. I got to be under his tutelage twice. Your current governor was not amused when I talked about China having infiltrated this state. I was at an event, it was the National Governors Association, and I had declassified a document where the Chinese Communist Party, its military security apparatus, had engaged in a complex activity to evaluate every one of our 50 governors all across the United States of America. You'll appreciate this, they were all sitting there, it was a Saturday afternoon. The Secretary of State was in front of them, they weren't paying much attention. And then I said, you know, the Chinese Communist Party in this document I have right here has decided whether you are a friend or a foe or if they're working on you. You should know every one of them immediately texted their chief, I need that document now. This is a tough place, you all are here in California. I'll talk about this in a bit. But as previous speakers said, never give up. Never give an inch. Keep your faith. The California dream is the American dream, or was at least. It will come back. We're here today because we're all going to work together to restore these very dreams for ourselves and for the next generation. General Secretary Xi Jinping has his China dream. He dreams of a world under authoritarian dictatorship, the totalitarian control of the Chinese Communist Party. While we dream of freedom, he dreams of a different thing, of the destruction of individual liberty and traditional institutions, especially in places such as Xinjiang and Tibet. While we dream of preserving our families' sacred places of worship, like this beautiful house of worship. He dreams of stealing the fruits of our hard work in the USA, while we dream of rewarding hard work, and good effort. He dreams, General Secretary Xi Jinping dreams of putting the entire Chinese nation behind an eternal great firewall, while we dream of freedom of expression and free flow of information every day and everywhere. It is especially wonderful for me today to be here with the Bay Area's Asian American community that is so much a part of those American dreams. Whether Asian Americans represent recent immigrants or their great-great-grandparents who came to places here like California more than a century ago, you are some of our nation's greatest patriots. In every industry, in every church, in every community, Asian Americans contribute immeasurably to our nation's way of life. I'll never forget when I spoke about the origins of the coronavirus. And I said that I believed it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, suggested it was suggested somehow by the legacy media that made me racist. The truth of the matter is I was standing up for the Chinese people and Asian Americans all over our great country who have been decimated. The Asian American community has understood something a long time. Frankly, as Elmer said, as Miles said, I think sometimes you all get it more than those of us who have lived here all our lives. I think you understand that the biggest foreign threat to the United States of America is, in fact, the Chinese Communist Party. There are over 1 billion Chinese people who get it as well. They understand that they are living under a regime that will continue to deny them freedom and the basic human rights to which each one of us is entitled because our Creator provided them to us. You know, I spent 2 years traveling the world talking about the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presented to every freedom-loving human being around the world. We woke America up to this. You should know this is at least 20, maybe as much as 50 years of U.S. policy that we had to amend, and that there were people in the State Department who didn't frankly think very much about this project. They'd held and they'd clung to this view that if we just traded a bit more and engaged a bit more, then somehow the Chinese Communist Party would change its stripes. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing. I hope we can all have, as a result of this, a candid conversation about how we got here, because I think that's important, and where America needs to go to live up to our American dream and to destroy the dream of Xi Jinping. A few months ago, I had the privilege to speak at the Reagan Library. It was an amazing honor for a young person like me. Who would have dreamed that this kid who grew up in California and served under President Reagan would get a chance to speak from his presidential library and talk about the central challenge of our times from abroad, the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party presents. We recognized, for 4 years, our administration recognized this reality. We saw the world as it was and not as we wished it to be. And we focused our entire governmental efforts on this. We made sure our allies understood this risk as well. We did so because we know that America is the greatest nation in the history of civilization. Amen. And we want it to remain so. In spite of what the wokesters will tell you, it's been that way since 1776. And as so many of you know, we'd be an awful lot better off if Americans would spend more time in the Bible and less in the 1619. So it's worth defending. America's worth defending, and we're going to do it. You all are here this afternoon. We're going to get after it. It's why nearly every single piece of legislation we put forward, we had done the hard work, and we were able to pass this with votes from both the Democrats and the Republicans on Capitol Hill. I think Americans of all political stripes now understand the threat. President Trump, of course, signed every one of those bills without hesitation. And then we built our military in a way that made clear that we were going to support our soldiers. And when Beijing confronted us and lied about human rights and said that America was in decline, I can assure you, I didn't sit back and take it. There's no other issue in the United States today that I think can unite people across the political spectrum. I think this is very important. The reason that many of you and your parents, or people like my Italian grandparents, came to America is they wanted to leave behind tyranny. This is something every American can understand. Our vigilance today about China is never about the Chinese people. My goodness, look at my senior advisor. An amazing man, born in China, who came to understand the tyranny and oppression of the party that now dominates that country. That party cares strictly about the enslavement of its own people with its Marxist-Leninist totalitarian rule. This is totally alien to historical Chinese culture. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party is not only the greatest foreign threat to America, it is the greatest threat to the 1.4 billion people still living on the mainland there. A little story. There's a city from about 30 miles called Burlingame. How many of you have been there? Yeah. It's in San Mateo County. There's a town, it's a little bit smaller, called Burlingame in Kansas, right near my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. It's in Osage County. Osage and San Mateo are very different places. Both Burlingames are named after one of America's finest diplomats and one of the Chinese people's greatest American friends. His name is Anson Burlingame. In China, he was known as Huan Chen. Anson Burlingame was a founding member of my party, the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln in the 1850s. He was President Lincoln's ambassador to China during our Civil War and the Chinese Taiping Rebellion, serving there between 1861 and 1867. Tough years here in America, tough years in China as well. During his tenure, he developed a deep friendship for the Chinese people. He represented the United States with a profound respect and fairness, for justice, for transparency. Few other nations treated China that way, but Burlingame worked to block European nations. Their imperialistic demands on China and the bonds he felt with the Chinese people were reciprocated. They appointed him, this is amazing, to head the first ever Chinese delegation in treaty negotiations with foreign nations, hoping to reach a fair set of bilateral agreements with the West. He took the court up on that offer, and in 1868 he led the Chinese delegation to Washington, D.C. He successfully negotiated with the Johnson administration what became known as the Burlingame Treaty between the United States and China. It was the first treaty based on full equality between the people of China and a Western nation after the Opium War. It's a really special story. Mark Twain wrote an obituary for Burlingame in which the greatest of all American writers said the following, quote, "In real greatness, ability, grandeur of character, and achievement, Anson Burlingame stood head and shoulders above all the Americans of today, save for one or two. He was a good man. Indeed, he was a great man, and all the world a servant." We should be proud of the historic relationship between the American people and the Chinese people. Look, we've had our days here. The truth is, we've had passed bigoted laws. In 1862, the Chinese Exclusion Act was offensive, thought so by many Americans. In my time in the State Department, I was constantly reminded of the American courage for justice, because just outside my office, on the 7th floor of the State Department, hangs a big portrait of John Watson Foster, one of my predecessors, the 32nd Secretary of State. He was the most powerful person, the most powerful voice at his time, fighting against that law in 1862, an American Secretary of State. Indeed, what that points out is one of the most exceptional things about our country. It's our ability to make good on our revolutionary founding promise, that founding promise of equality for every human being who lives in our country. And today, you know, there's a cause that has made it. So Chinese students study at our universities more than any other nation in the world. Nearly 40% indeed of all of our international students from nearly 200 countries around the world hail from China. The Chinese people love America. And they choose the U.S. as the top place to send their children for education. Their professors may think this is a racist country, but they do not. They come because it's the most successful multiracial society on the planet and the greatest country to ever respect the rights that the Lord has given to us. You know, Secretary Xi talked a lot about a century of humiliation and how the Chinese Communist Party is leading the country to national rejuvenation. His words, not mine. Because it was abused by Western powers. This is his storyline. This is what he tells his people and indeed told American leadership. But the two stories I told about Secretary Foster and about Anson Burlingame showed that the United States treated China and Chinese people with respect. And that helped build the deep friendship between our peoples. No, the CCP is an ideological party masquerading as a nation. They want to dominate the world. They want to change the way each and every one of you live here in the United States. They try to convince us that the virtues of America are indeed evil. Don't buy it. Don't buy it for a second. They indoctrinate the Chinese nation with lies about America and about the American people. But they have in China an ahistorical paranoia. From Mao to Xi, every Chinese communist leader has regarded the United States as pushing an international conspiracy against China and the Chinese people. And frankly, one of the worst conspiracies and one of the worst lies they tell their own people is that they, the Chinese Communist Party, represents them. The central thesis of the policy that we developed in the Trump administration was the recognition that the Chinese Communist Party does not represent those 1.4. Here's my challenge today. Here's my challenge to General Secretary Xi, if he's listening. I'm sure he's not, but I'm sure everybody else in the entire military apparatus who sanctioned me and my wife and my son. I'm sure they're all listening. It reminds me, I was sanctioned at noon on January 20th, about 12:01 Eastern Time, to be precise. It said that Secretary Pompeo, former Secretary Pompeo, is sanctioned, and his whole family. And my son is engaged to a lovely young Christian woman named Rachel. And a couple hours later, she called me and said, "Mr. Pompeo, am I marrying into the sanctions regime?" Yes, Rachel, you are. Consult your lawyer. Goodness. Look, here's my challenge to General Secretary Xi. Mr. General Secretary, if you believe you represent these people, hold an election. Hold an election in Hong Kong that is free and fair. Hold an election in Tibet that is fair. Hold an election. Let the 2 million Uyghur Muslims out of internment camps and hold an election. Hold an election in Chongqing. Hold an election in Wuhan. Hold an election all across your country. I know who will campaign against you. It will be the Chinese people. You know, it always makes me laugh when we see this in the United States. The left wants to co-opt language. They want to use different words to describe. They hesitate to use the word mother. You know, they use names like the People's Republic and the People's Liberation Army. And their news outlet called the People's Daily. We know this. Those institutions don't belong to the people, they belong to the party. This is a misuse of language, and it's intentional. It's intentional. They have to lie. They have to keep the lie because they know that the Chinese relationship, the Chinese people's relationship and friendship with the American people is so great that they must tell this lie to to their own people. They use their entire state apparatus to denigrate our nation so they may dominate the people of their own. So you all know a little bit of this story, but it's worth spending a few minutes. What did we get done in the 4 years that the American people gave us? First, we told the truth every day. We told the truth that it was an illegitimate regime, a communist party, and what Xi Jinping is not, a democratically elected president. The Chinese communist regime is a competitor, economically, technologically, military, and maybe most important, ideologically. And that the Chinese Communist Party is at war with the United States, whether we want to be at war with them or not. Our most cherished values are at risk, and the Chinese people want and deserve the same freedom that we have. Elmer spoke about the Unalienable Rights Commission. It was something that was on my heart. We, even in our State Department, had walked away from the central understandings of what was spoken about here earlier by the pastor and others, about our rights having been provided to us by our Creator. The State Department wasn't talking about that when it traveled around the world. It talked about human rights in ways that were deeply disconnected from anything I had known. So I tried to bring it back to our founding, back to the central ideas that built this great nation, laying a foundation for those universal rights that matter to every human being, everywhere. I wanted that to be the guidepost for my diplomats all around the world. So we were able then to reverse a decades-long process of engagement with the Chinese Communist Party at all costs. We demanded with Beijing, we demanded reciprocity and transparency. If you're going to have your diplomats spy in our country, we're going to close your embassy in Houston. Like that consulate in Houston was stealing secrets from all across the state of Texas and up into Kansas and destroying the capacity for Americans to continue to benefit from the fruits of their labors and putting Americans at risk. I also had the incredible privilege to consistently, everywhere I went, meet with Chinese dissidents, brave men and women. Some of you are here today who survived Tiananmen. I met with men and women who survived Beijing's attacks on the Falun Gong and who escaped Tibet. We spoke up for persecuted churches all across China, Christians, people of every faith trying simply to live out their lives. And when senior Chinese Communist Party officials violated their obligations to a UN treaty and destroyed Hong Kong's freedom, we sanctioned them. And then when we observed the atrocities, the kinds of actions that the whole world has often said we would never permit to happen again. Right? Never again. When we saw this taking place in China, we declared that act genocide. Under my direction, we championed the great triumph of freedom and democracy in Taiwan. I pray this administration will continue to do so that the exemplary model of Taiwan and Taiwan's democracy can and will provide powerful inspiration for people all across China. Because of what President Trump allowed me and my team to do, America's finally begun to treat the Chinese Communist Party truly as a threat to the United States of America. I mentioned Hong Kong a little bit ago. It holds a special place in my heart. I have so many friends from Hong Kong. These are amazing individuals just like Elmer, who love freedom and love America and love Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong had a promise, and the Chinese Communist Party does what it does to every promise. It breaks it. It walks away from it. They were denied the human rights, the independent judiciary, the freedom of the press, and the rule of law that the Chinese Communist Party had committed to those freedom-loving people in Hong Kong. Like so many of you, I was outraged by this betrayal by the Chinese Communist Party. The massive democracy protests, the brutal crackdown, and the CCP's so-called national security law took place during my time at the State Department. There were those who wanted to simply ignore it, not speak to it. But you and I both know that appeasement is not going to work with the Chinese Communist Party. We must get that. So we declared, we certified under U.S. law that the high degree of autonomy no longer existed. And on May 27th of 2020, we notified the representatives of the American people in Congress of that fact. 2 days later, President Trump went to the Rose Garden. You'll remember these remarks. He gave a press conference announcing America's withdrawal of the special treatment that had applied to Hong Kong under the one country, two systems formula. Sadly, Hong Kong's suffering continues. It appears now destined to be just another communist city. I can't tell you how much this saddens me and my family. When the CCP knocked down and smashed Hong Kong's freedom, also shattered any illusions about the Chinese Communist Party, any illusions anyone might have about the regime or its trustworthiness. I think the whole world would see that. And to those of you who are here today, who are from Hong Kong, or who still have family and friends in that city, know that the world is still watching. We're inspired by Jimmy Lai, by Elmer Lee. Countless freedom fighters who are inside of Hong Kong. I want to make sure we always honor them. Know this, the fight will be long, but these are the individuals, these freedom fighters in Hong Kong. They are the future of Hong Kong, not communism. I look forward to the day that I can travel to Hong Kong, and the leadership there will itself establish a commission on American labor. You know, standing up to the CCP is in the finest traditions of the United States of America. We are indeed indispensable. Whenever I travel the world, you all provided me this beautiful white over blue airplane. Thank you. It was really nice. I'm now back in the middle seat on Delta. That's good too. But the work that we did, I pray, honored America. I pray that it honored the freedom-loving people all across the world, indeed those people inside of China who are so long suffering as well. Our story here is not about racism. It's about redemption. Our story in America is about freedom. It's about a promissory note written to every human being because we are all made in the image of the Lord, of God. That is the America that this young boy who grew up in Santa Ana knows. We should recognize, too, how the CCP attempts to weaponize information, and we should be keenly aware of it. This is a central part of its global ambition. There is not a single regime in the world with a tighter grip on information and the flow of information than the regime in Beijing. It's forced its people by gripping that information to live by the lies that they tell them. Omar spoke about the things that he hadn't seen and he hadn't known, because he hadn't had the opportunity to see them. We are determined to help the Chinese people tear down that great firewall. I mention this here today because all around us, here in Silicon Valley, there are a group of people that could help us with that cause. When you see them in the grocery store, tell them. When you see them at the soccer game, tell them. And if we can get them to come to church, tell them there too. As long as the CCP exerts control over every company, every Chinese company, we must be vigilant. We must ensure that we are not contributing to the well-being of those very companies that are aiming to undermine the well-being of our children and our grandchildren. So you all know this, they've been stealing our stuff for too long. We need to stop that. We can do this. We have to be honest about this intellectual property theft that has destroyed millions of good jobs all across America. Where the hard-won fruits of the labor of the American people were stolen by General Secretary Xi. We're still ahead. He knows it. He's going to keep trying to steal. We must not let him do that. We can prevent it. I'll close with this thought. We know this much. We know that we are blessed to live in this very special place, to come here on a Sunday afternoon, to talk about the things that matter most to us, the things that are in our heart, to hear from Pastor McClure. Behind the sign you see that says Stand for Freedom, there's another set of words that I saw as I walked up where it says, Good news. Good news. I want to amplify this message. There is good news all across our land, and there will be good news for the people of China as well, as long as we all stay in the fight. Yes. You should know those of us in the fight get beat up from time to time. I'm sure some of you have suffered this as well. But fear not. Fear not, because the Lord is with us. And I want to thank everyone who's here this afternoon. From the Pompeos, from myself, my wife Susan, and my son Nick. When I come and see a room full of freedom-loving people like you, and people who understand faith in the way that you do, then the nicks, the cuts, the beatings, the difficulties that come with leading this fight, I am encouraged. I'm made more optimistic, and I know that my duty continues. Thank you all.